When 73-year-old black veteran Thomas Avery was handcuffed by two white cops outside a pharmacy, they thought they were just doing their job. But within 30 minutes, the FBI stormed their station not to help them, but to rescue the man they'd wrongfully arrested. Thomas wasn't just a retiree, he was one of the nation's most valuable intelligence operatives. How could a hero end up in handcuffs? Simply for existing while black. If stories like this matter to you, share your thoughts below, and let's dive into what really happened that day. You wouldn't notice Thomas Avery if you passed him on the street. Tall, sure, but slightly stooped now at 73. Dressed neatly always with pressed slacks and shoes shined like it still mattered. A soft blue shirt, tucked in just right collar aligned with quiet discipline. Not a man trying to impress, just a man who never forgot how. Every morning in Cedar Hill, Georgia, Thomas started his day at exactly 5:30 a.m. No alarm clock. His body still ran on the same rhythm it had since the war. His steps were measured, his gestures quiet. Coffee at 5:35, newspaper retrieved at 5:40, shoes polished by 6 Tazurahs. The kind of habits that don't fade, especially when you've survived both battlefields and bureaucracies. His house was modest single-story brick, but inside it was a museum of a life both seen and unseen. The living room walls told the story others often forgot. One photo, Thomas in full dress blues, shaking hands with President Reagan. Another, a younger Thomas briefing NATO commanders in Germany. And right in the center, his wedding day with Grace. She wore ivory. He wore pride. Now that picture sat in a silver frame next to a folded flag on the mantel. There was also a photo of his son Jason graduation day from Howard Law School. That one Thomas dusted every morning as if polishing the memory could somehow keep it close. Thomas Avery had lived many lives, but the one he lived now was quiet. Not because he had nothing left to say, oh no, but because he'd learned that silence, when worn right, could be its own kind of armor. That morning a letter came. The envelope was plain handwritten. No return address, but the handwriting stopped him cold. It was from Davis, an old friend from those days. The days no one really talked about. Inside, just a single line scribbled in quick ink, Umbra Protocol reactivated. Be ready. Thomas stared at the note for a moment, then folded it in half, placed it back in the envelope, and tucked it into the hollow back of his bookshelf behind The Art of War and Signals and Deception. He didn't react. He didn't curse. He didn't even sigh. Instead, he glanced at the clock, 6:04, still on schedule. He moved to the kitchen, poured exactly 1 tablespoon of grounds into the machine, filled it to the 6th cup line, and started the brew. While the coffee hissed and steamed, he stood by the window, arms crossed behind his back. Outside, the street was quiet. Cedar Hill was the kind of place people called safe, though not everyone felt that way. For Thomas, safety was never about fences or front doors. It was about perception, and perception here didn't always favor men who looked like him, no matter how many medals they'd earned. He didn't wave at the neighbor across the street. Not because he wasn't polite, he was, but because after 3 years living here, she still clutched her purse tighter every time they crossed paths. Even when he was just trimming his hedges, Thomas had learned not to take it personally. Prejudice wasn't always loud. Sometimes it just looked like a glance too long, or a smile withheld at the mailbox. But this morning, the air felt different. The humidity hung heavier. The silence outside his window had a weight to it, like something was waiting to happen. He poured his coffee into a ceramic mug white with the Air Force insignia and sat down in his recliner. The paper was already folded. His hands moved through the pages with muscle memory, but his eyes weren't really reading. Headlines about local taxes, a school board debate, and a robbery at a nearby gas station. That last one? He paused. A grainy surveillance photo of a tall black man in a hoodie. No name. Just suspect remains at large. Thomas studied the face. Didn't recognize it, but he didn't need to. He already knew what some folks would see a threat, not a person. And it wouldn't take much for that fear to spill over into someone else's reality. He took a slow sip. His hand didn't tremble. Grace used to say he had the patience of a monk and the stare of a general. He missed her. At 6:45, Thomas stood, took one last look at his living room, his medals, his photos, his folded flag, and stepped outside. The sun was already punishing. As he locked the door, he felt the same thing he'd felt every day since he moved to Cedar Hill, not quite welcome, but too proud to let it show. A woman walking her golden retriever across the street didn't meet his eyes. He didn't force her to. As he walked toward his car keys in hand, posture straight, there was no sign, no warning, no whisper of what was about to come. Just another Thursday morning for a man who had survived wars overseas, yet still had to prepare for battles in his own backyard. It was supposed to be a quiet morning. Pick up his heart medication, grab some denture adhesive, home by noon. That was Thomas Avery's ritual, simple, precise. Even his steps across the pharmacy parking lot seemed to follow a rhythm only he understood. But that rhythm broke when two squad cars pulled up, engines rumbling louder than the summer heat. "Sir!" a sharp voice barked. Thomas turned slowly. Two officers approached, one tall and rigid with a buzz cut and mirrored shades, the other younger, hesitant eyes darting. "Can I help you, officers?" Thomas asked calmly. The older one stepped forward. "Officer Troy Maddox." His badge gleamed, but there was something bitter behind his smile. "We've had reports of a robbery last night." "You match the description," Maddox said, circling Thomas like he was prey. Thomas blinked, then chuckled softly. "Robbery." He lifted the small pharmacy bag. "Just picked up my heart meds and glue for my dentures." Deputy Sean Kelley, the younger one, glanced at Maddox. "He's got a veteran's ID," he muttered, spotting the military tag around Thomas's neck. Maddox snatched the bag, rifled through it like it held state secrets. "Could be covering something," he muttered. Then louder, "This pill bottle could be fentanyl crushed into prescription form. Happens all the time. You people always find a way to dress it up." Thomas's expression didn't change, but his voice dropped. Measured, firm. "You people," he repeated. "What you mean is you didn't see a suspect. You saw my skin." Maddox scoffed. "Keep talking, old man." A small group had started to gather near the edge of the lot. Among them, a young black woman raised her phone camera, recording steady. Kelley shifted uneasily. "Troy, maybe we should." But Maddox was already pulling out cuffs. "Turn around, hands behind your back." Thomas didn't move right away, not because he was resisting, but because he was tired, not of standing, of repeating this moment decade after decade. Then slowly he turned. The metal clicked shut around his wrists, rough and cold. Maddox's voice was louder now for the bystanders as much as for Thomas. "Suspect in custody, possibly armed, possibly under influence. We'll verify his ID at the station." Thomas didn't argue, didn't shout. He simply looked at Kelley. The younger officer couldn't hold the gaze. He looked away. "You don't think I belong here either, do you?" Thomas asked quietly. Kelley hesitated. His voice, when it came, was almost a whisper. I don't know what to think anymore." A beat. Then Thomas replied, soft but cutting. "That's the problem." By now, the girl filming was slowly stepping forward. "His name is Thomas Avery," she said. "He's a vet. He just picked up his meds. I got it all on video." Maddox turned. "Step back, ma'am. Interfering with a police operation is a chargeable offense." But she didn't move. Neither did her camera. Thomas was guided, or rather dragged, toward the squad car. He didn't resist. But his eyes, distant and dim under the brim of his old veteran's cap, scanned the quiet faces watching him. A father holding his son. A woman clutching her purse tighter. A man in a business suit stepping back as if afraid the moment might touch him. No one spoke. As the door slammed shut, Thomas sat in the back seat, hands cuffed back straight. His eyes fixed on nothing. This wasn't fear. It was resignation. The kind that seeps in after years of giving this country your strength and seeing it treat you like a stranger. In that silence, Deputy Kelley finally spoke, barely audible over the engine. He really didn't do anything. Maddox didn't answer, just kept driving. Inside the cruiser, Thomas closed his eyes. The last thing he saw was the girl's phone still pointed at him. Red light, blinking, still recording. And the clock had just started ticking. The patrol car rolled through downtown like nothing unusual had happened. Sirens off, windows up. But inside, the silence between the three men was thick like a storm that hadn't found the courage to break. In the front seat, Officer Troy Maddox tapped his fingers against the wheel. With each light they passed, his smirk grew bolder. "Well, well," he muttered half to himself. Old man thought the uniform was a shield. Hate to break it to him, but that war ended decades ago. He glanced in the rearview mirror and added with a chuckle, "Ain't nothing sadder than a rusted-out soldier who still thinks he's somebody." From the back seat, Thomas Avery didn't blink. He simply met Maddox's eyes through the glass. "I didn't think I was somebody," Thomas said, voice low. "I just hoped I'd stopped being nobody." That shut Maddox up just for a beat. Deputy Sean Kelley shifted uncomfortably. His hands gripped the clipboard on his lap, but his eyes kept flicking back to the veteran's ID card. "Chief Master Sergeant," he whispered under his breath. "Thomas J. Avery." It sounded familiar, like a name from a textbook or a class he almost passed. He studied the card again. Date of enlistment 1970. Medals, clearances, a Umbra-level intel tag burned into the corner. Kelley turned back to look at Thomas. "You were in intelligence?" Thomas nodded once. 32 years. I've seen a lot. Most of it ugly. Some of it unforgettable." There was a pause. Then Kelley asked the question that had been eating at him since the cuffs clicked. "Why didn't you say more? Fight it!" Thomas leaned back, the leather squeaking under his shoulders. "Because it's not the first time," he said. "And when you've been seen as a threat longer than you've been seen as a man, you learn when silence says enough." Maddox scoffed. "Here we go. Another war story. Next he'll say he got shot for a country that never cared." Thomas chuckled. "No, but I did get detained in Iraq by our own men. Thought I was an enemy asset. Didn't matter the badge on my chest, just the face under the helmet." He leaned slightly forward. "Same eyes I saw in yours today, Officer Maddox." Kelley turned toward the window, trying to hide how much that hit him. Maddox, on the other hand, stiffened. "Don't talk about my eyes," he snapped. "You don't know me." Thomas didn't flinch. "I don't. But I know fear. And I know grief when it tries to dress itself up as justice." For a second, Maddox's grip on the wheel tightened. His jaw clenched. Something inside him flickered, then vanished. A red light stalled them at an intersection. A school bus passed, kids waving through the windows. One of them, a young black boy, pointed at the patrol car and looked confused. Kelley glanced down again at the veteran's ID, then to Thomas. "I feel like I've heard of you before," he murmured. "Were you involved in something big?" Thomas didn't answer right away. Instead, he asked softly, "Does it matter now?" And in that moment, Kelley wasn't sure. But what he was sure of was that he didn't like how any of this felt. Not the way Maddox laughed, not the way Thomas sat quiet but dignified, not the way that camera phone still played in his head. There was a story here, bigger than a mistaken identity, bigger than a report. From the corner of his mind, a memory surfaced. A lecture in the academy. A classified case discussed behind closed doors. A retired operative praised by a visiting colonel. Thomas Avery. His stomach turned. He looked back at the rearview mirror again. Thomas was staring out the window now unmoved, but in his posture was a patience Kelley couldn't understand. Finally, Thomas spoke again. "There's a difference," he said, "between being a cop and being a man with power." Kelley turned slightly. "What do you mean?" Thomas's eyes met his through the mirror. "The difference is knowing who you serve and who you protect them from." And then the light turned green. The car moved on. But inside, something had already shifted. Kelley didn't say another word for the rest of the drive. But the silence wasn't empty. It was full of doubt, of questions, of things that don't go away just because you try not to hear them. The metal cuffs still dug into Thomas's wrists as he stood under the flickering fluorescent lights of the Cedar Hill booking room. He said nothing, didn't flinch, didn't beg. His silence unsettled even the desk sergeant, who muttered, "He's too calm." Officer Maddox leaned against the wall, arms crossed, chewing on a toothpick with smug satisfaction. "Guy thinks he's some kind of monk. Or maybe just senile." He chuckled. "Let's see what the system has to say." The younger officer, Sean Kelley, quietly typed in Thomas's details, then guided his weathered fingers onto the fingerprint scanner. One by one. Left thumb. "Hold still, sir." Thomas looked straight ahead, his voice steady. "You might want to step back." Kelley paused. "Excuse me." Thomas didn't answer, just stared at the scanner. Suddenly the computer beeped, then froze. The screen blinked white, then red. Umbra code identified priority. Red national level alert terminal lockdown initiated. The entire system shut down with a sharp click. Lights dimmed. Even the air in the room seemed to change. "What the hell?" Maddox snapped, stepping forward. Kelley read the screen aloud, voice cracking. "It says, priority red. Umbra. What is that?" In the back corner, Thomas simply exhaled, slow and measured. There it is. Far away in a secure building just outside D.C. Alarms were triggered that hadn't gone off in over a decade. Within 2 minutes, a red line rang at the FBI's Intelligence Command Center. Only 6 people in the agency had the clearance to answer it. One of them was Director Elaine Morris. She had been in a strategy meeting when her assistant burst in, pale as chalk. "Ma'am, you need to see this. A priority red alert just fired, Cedar Hill, Georgia." Morris didn't look up. "That code hasn't been touched in 15 years. Her assistant whispered, "It's him. It's Avery." That stopped her cold. Elaine Morris rose, slowly took the tablet, and stared at the name on the screen. Thomas J. Avery, retired chief. Master Sergeant, U.S. Air Force, former Umbra operative level 9, clearance status, national asset contact, forbidden without authorization. Her hand trembled slightly. In her mind, the room faded. She was 26 again, pinned down under sniper fire in a sandstorm in northern Mali. Her convoy had been ambushed, radio dead, team scattered, bleeding from the shoulder, certain she wouldn't survive. Then he came. Avery. Calm, focused, deadly. "On your feet, Morris. You want to die, you sit. You want to live, you move." He'd carried her through fire, trained her with patience, shaped her with silence. Back in the present, her voice hardened. "Tell me what happened," she ordered. "Local cops booked him as a suspect in a petty theft case," her aide said, almost ashamed. "They had no idea who he was." Morris's face turned to stone. "They cuffed him." "Yes, ma'am." She closed her eyes. 1 second, 2. Deploy crisis response. 1, she snapped. "Not a team, a full unit. Gear up the jet. I'm going. Director. Get me Langley on a secure line. Let them know their ghost just resurfaced in chains." Another agent approached. "We need to follow local protocol before..." She cut him off. Protocol broke the moment they laid hands on him. The room was silent. Morris's eyes swept across the agents. "I don't care who made the call in Georgia. They just turned a national protector into a national threat. You think Avery forgot how to burn down a system? He built half of it. She paused. Her voice dropped. And if they strip him of his dignity, there won't be a badge left to hide behind. The holding cell was colder than it looked, pale blue walls, a broken bench, and one flickering light above that hummed like it had a secret to keep. Thomas sat in the far corner, hands resting calmly on his knees, though his body told a different story. Beneath the stillness, there was a tightness growing in his chest. A slow, creeping burn. He'd felt it before. Afghanistan, Sudan, Baghdad. It was never the pain that worried him. It was how long he could keep it from showing. Across from him sat a younger man, maybe late 30s, with grease under his fingernails and tired eyes. Miguel Rivera, he said softly, nodding toward Thomas. Tail light busted. That's why they threw me in here. Thomas offered a faint smile. Thomas Avery. Heart's busted. That's why I'm sitting still. Miguel chuckled, but it faded fast when he saw Thomas grip his side. You okay, man? Not yet, Thomas whispered. But I will be. I just need a minute to remember how. Out at the front desk, Officer Sean Kelley couldn't shake the unease settling in his gut. He had tried twice now to access Thomas's full profile using internal systems. Both times the screen responded the same way. Restricted file, encrypted DHS authorization required. Attempt logged. Kelley leaned back, blinking. He looked around to make sure Maddox wasn't nearby, then typed slowly into the Notes app on his phone. Who are you, Mr. Avery? Back in the cell, Thomas's breathing had become shorter, shallower. He leaned forward slightly, elbows on knees, closing his eyes. The meds were gone, confiscated with his wallet and prescriptions. No one had asked. No one had listened. Miguel moved toward him, concerned. You need help. Thomas didn't respond right away. Instead, he reached slowly for a roll of toilet paper, careful not to draw attention. His fingers trembled slightly as he tore off one long sheet and began tapping dots and dashes with a short pen, like muscle memory from another life. Umbra active. Code Grace. He folded the thin paper and tucked it discreetly beneath the inside flap of his sock. Miguel looked at him confused. What's that? Insurance, Thomas murmured, still catching his breath. Sometimes the world forgets who you are. Morse doesn't. Meanwhile, Kelley paced the hallway, wrestling with his conscience. He couldn't stop thinking about that blank file, about the way Thomas had spoken earlier, not begging, not angry, just calm. Controlled, like a man who had seen the worst and refused to become it. He turned the corner just in time to see Officer Maddox walking down the hallway, whistling like a man proud of nothing. You still bothered by the old guy? Maddox scoffed. Something doesn't feel right, Kelley muttered. He's not like the others. He knows things. Maddox rolled his eyes. They all know things. It's called manipulation. You give them a little kindness, next thing you know you're being sued for profiling. Just do your job. Kelley didn't reply. As Maddox walked off, Kelley slipped toward the evidence room. He grabbed the belongings bag for Avery, examining the prescription bottle, the clean military ID, the worn pocket journal with 2 pages torn out. Inside the sock, he found the strip of toilet paper. He unfolded it, stared. What is this? He whispered aloud, fingers tracing the code. He didn't understand it, but he knew it wasn't random. It had a rhythm, a purpose. He pocketed the strip. Back in the cell, Maddox appeared at the bar's keys dangling from one hand. His smirk was tighter now, forced. You're too calm, old man. Thomas looked up slowly, eyes steady. You ever wonder why a calm man in cuffs makes you nervous? He asked. Maybe it's not about me at all. Maddox stepped closer, jaw twitching. You think you're something special, huh? Thomas didn't blink. No, I know I used to be, and that's what scares you. From the hallway, Kelley heard the exchange, heard the silence afterward, and for the first time he wasn't just confused. He was afraid. Afraid that this wasn't a mistake. Afraid that they had crossed a line not just with a man, but with something much bigger. When Jason Avery's phone rang that afternoon, he was midway through preparing closing arguments for a civil rights case. He almost didn't pick up, but the voice on the other end froze him in place. "Mr. Avery, I'm a nurse at Cedar Hill Medical Clinic. Your father didn't show for his checkup, but someone saw him get handcuffed behind the pharmacy." Jason's breath caught. Handcuffed? "Yes, sir." He was calm, but it didn't look right. "A young woman recorded it. It's on Facebook. It's going viral." Jason didn't hesitate. His mind shifted from son to soldier, from lawyer to strategist. He closed his laptop, reached for his keys, and made 2 calls. "First, Colonel Manning. It's Jason. My father, Thomas Avery, has been detained in Georgia. I need your discretion. And I need confirmation, is the Umbra clearance still active? Second Channel 4 News. You might want to check what's happening at the Cedar Hill police station. A retired Air Force sergeant just got arrested for buying heart medication. Outside the station, the air was already shifting. By sundown, the sidewalks across the street weren't empty anymore. They were lined with people, some holding candles, others holding signs. Veterans deserve respect. Justice. For Avery. Would you cuff a white colonel? At the center stood Reverend Isaiah Daniels, a tall black man with a silver cross over his chest and a voice that had stirred hearts since Selma. He wasn't shouting. He didn't need to. Instead, he raised his hand and spoke into a portable mic. Thomas Avery didn't fight overseas to be humiliated at home. He didn't serve under 3 presidents to be reduced to a suspect outside a drugstore. The crowd murmured. Quiet, respectful, but firm. Daniels continued. If this can happen to him, what chance does the rest of us have? Cameras began to arrive. So did satellite vans, reporters with umbrellas, microphones, CNN, MSNBC, even local conservative channels, skeptical at first, now quietly repositioning their narratives. The video, less than 2 minutes long, had exploded on every platform. In it, Thomas never raised his voice, never cursed, but his words hit like thunder. You're not arresting a suspect. You're handcuffing history. Inside the station, Sheriff Bowers stared at the wall-mounted TV in his office. Every network was covering the story. His face paled. He turned to his deputy. Get Maddox and Kelley in here, now. And for the love of God, find out who leaked the name Umbra. If this becomes federal. He didn't finish the sentence. Across state lines, 30,000 feet above ground, a black helicopter sliced through cloud cover with urgency. Inside, Director Elaine Morris studied the live feed on her tablet. It showed the crowd forming outside Cedar Hill PD, growing with each passing hour. Agent Diaz leaned closer. We're not even on the ground yet, and the public's already there. Morris's eyes stayed fixed on the screen. This is what happens when you lay hands on the wrong man, she said flatly. The nation remembers who he is, even if your system forgets. Diaz glanced down. ETA 26 minutes. Morris nodded. Alert the Attorney General's liaison. Stage 2 begins when we land. Back in his hotel room, Jason Avery dressed in full suit and tie like he was heading into court, not a protest. But he wasn't going to yell. He wasn't going to march. He was going to walk into that station, calmly, firmly, as a son, as an officer of the court, and as the living echo of a man this country was trying very hard to forget. He slipped the Air Force lapel pin onto his blazer and whispered under his breath, Hold on, Dad. They just woke up the wrong family. The night had grown thick and quiet with only the soft buzz of overhead lights in the narrow hallway. Officer Sean Kelley stood still, his back leaning against the cool wall outside the holding cell, eyes fixed on nothing and everything all at once. Inside the cell, Thomas Avery sat upright, his hands calm in his lap, his breathing slow but tight. There was a stillness in him, not weakness, but something deeper, something earned. Kelley slowly opened the cell door. Thomas didn't turn his head, but he knew. "You got questions?" Thomas said quietly. Kelley stepped inside, hesitated, then nodded. "I do," he said. "If you didn't do anything wrong, why are you so calm?" Thomas let the silence breathe before answering. "Because if I raise my voice, they'll say I was resisting. If I argue, they'll say I was dangerous. And if I break down, they'll say I was unstable." He glanced at Kelley, his tone even. "I've learned over time since silence is the only thing they don't twist." Kelley looked down, unsure what to say. "I don't know if you believe me," Thomas added, "but I see it in you. You're still choosing." Kelley swallowed. "What if I choose wrong? Then you'll live with that choice, long after your badge loses its shine." The young officer stood there a moment longer, then turned and left his mind racing, heart pounding. In the briefing room, Officer Troy Maddox leaned back in his chair, sipping lukewarm coffee as the local news ran on low volume. The headline flashed, "Veteran detained without cause." He scoffed. Ridiculous. Kelley entered quietly, trying not to meet his gaze. He sat across from Maddox, placing a tablet on the desk. His hand trembled slightly, but his voice stayed firm. "I reviewed the footage from the arrest." Maddox raised an eyebrow. "And he had his prescription. His ID, no weapons, no threats." Maddox shrugged. "He looked like a threat. That's enough." Kelley pressed a little harder. "You called him just another thug with medals." "That's on the body cam." Maddox gave a half smile. "Yeah, and what are you gonna do? Tell your Twitter followers?" There was an edge now in his voice, a warning. Kelley didn't answer. He slipped the USB drive into his pocket silently. Back in the locker room, Kelley scanned the booking file again, the military ID, the sealed notation, Umbra code, classified, still locked, still redacted. But something inside him couldn't let it go. He opened a new file on his tablet, attached every detail he could find, booking photos, medical delays, Maddox's comments, and then he sent it to a federal oversight channel marked Urgent Rights Violation, Veteran in Custody. Then he sat alone, staring at the wall, until the door swung open. "Maddox." "You've been busy," he said, voice low. Kelley stood. "Just doing what's right." Maddox stepped closer. The room shrank. "You really think saving some old black guy is worth burning your career?" Kelley's jaw tightened. "I think doing nothing would be worse." Then came the blow. A sharp slap across his face. Kelley barely moved, just looked back at him. "You think this ends well for you?" Maddox hissed. But before Kelley could answer, whoop, whoop, whoop. A sound grew louder outside, low, heavy, like a heartbeat in the sky. The station lights flickered as dust lifted from the parking lot. A helicopter descended, black, unmarked, but deadly clear in its purpose. And from it stepped a woman in a dark trench coat, silver streak in her hair, and certainty in every step. Elaine Morris, FBI Director. She moved with quiet authority past the stunned officers, her badge raised not in anger, but command. "I'm looking for a man named Thomas Avery," she said calmly. Sheriff Bowers rushed down the hallway. "Now wait just a minute." But Morris didn't stop. "You've detained a federal intelligence veteran under false suspicion, and you've ignored red code alerts from DC for over 2 hours. That's not a mistake. That's misconduct." She looked toward Kelley, who stood frozen. "You're Officer Sean Kelley?" He nodded quietly. She stepped closer, lowered her voice. "You filed the report." Another nod. Morris looked him in the eye, then gently placed a hand on his shoulder. "Well done. You may have just prevented a national incident." Inside the cell, Thomas lifted his head as the noise outside grew. "Sounds like a storm," Miguel said, sitting beside him. Thomas closed his eyes. Not a storm. He stood slowly, placing one hand on the wall to steady himself. That he said with a quiet strength is the sound of truth arriving. And it always does, eventually. The moment the FBI stepped through the station doors, the temperature seemed to shift like the building itself knew something had broken. The hush that followed wasn't silence, it was submission. And at the center of it all stood Director Elaine Morris, her voice calm but resolute. Per emergency federal authorization under National Code UMBRA, she said, holding up a document sealed in red. This facility is now under federal lockdown. Gasps, whispers, then stillness. Maddox stepped forward, flushed and defiant. You can't just walk in here. I just did, Morris replied coolly. You are Officer Troy Maddox. He squared his shoulders. That's right. Agent Ramirez moved in behind him. Turn around. What? Maddox scoffed. This is a joke. But the click of handcuffs wasn't funny. You are being detained pending federal investigation of unlawful detainment, abuse of authority, and obstruction of a classified national protocol. Maddox struggled as they locked his wrists. You're siding with a damn criminal that old man doesn't deserve. You don't get to define who deserves dignity, Morris cut in sharply. Not anymore. In the hallway, Officer Kelley stood motionless as Maddox was led past him. Their eyes met briefly, one filled with hatred, the other with quiet conviction. You'll regret this, Maddox hissed. Kelley didn't flinch. Already did. That's why I changed. Meanwhile, deep in his medical cell, Thomas Avery sat propped against the wall, his breathing ragged but controlled. The lights flickered slightly as the door opened, and Morris stepped in. For a brief moment, the hardened director of the FBI looked nothing like her title. Her eyes softened. Her shoulders dropped. She reached into her coat and pulled out a small silver coin, worn and weathered. You gave me this, she said, placing it into his hand. Back in Morocco. You told me to keep it until I earned it. Thomas looked at it, then at her. And did you? Morris smiled. Today I hope so. She pulled a chair closer and sat beside him, her voice dropping. You didn't raise your voice. You didn't throw a punch. And yet the whole country is listening to you. Thomas let out a breath. Funny how quiet can echo louder than a siren if you wait long enough. Morris nodded. You're going to the hospital now. We've got a secure team ready. Outside the station, the media lights blazed. Jason Avery pushed through the crowd, eyes darting until they found the stretcher. His father lay on it still and pale but alive. Jason rushed forward, taking Thomas's hand. Dad. Thomas opened one eye. His voice was barely a whisper. You cut your hair, he said. Jason laughed through tears. It's been years, Dad. Thomas gave a faint nod. Still doesn't suit you. They both chuckled quietly, painfully, but the warmth returned, a thread stitched between them. I thought I lost you, Jason said. You never did, Thomas whispered. Just had to stay silent long enough for the noise to burn out. By early evening, the lawn outside Cedar Hills police station had transformed. Reporters filled the edges. Protest signs bobbed gently in the wind. But at the front of it all stood Reverend Isaiah Daniels, holding a Bible and a megaphone. He raised his voice not to yell, but to deliver something that felt like truth. This is not just about one man, he said. This is not just about one arrest. This is about a pattern, a sickness in silence. And today, we're not just asking for justice, we're demanding change. Applause rippled across the crowd. Some wept, others stood tall. But every face was turned toward the courthouse steps, where Cedar Hill's badge no longer gleamed as proudly as it once did. Inside, Sheriff Bowers sat behind his desk, watching it all on a muted television screen. His hand trembled slightly as his phone rang. Effective immediately, the voice on the line said, "You are placed on administrative leave pending federal review." Bowers didn't respond. He just sat there, surrounded by walls that had never once told him he was wrong until now. By midnight, the FBI seal was posted on the doors. The building was evacuated. Every file, every recording, every report sealed for review. And Cedar Hill, once a quiet town with loud assumptions, stood exposed. Back at the hospital, Thomas Avery stared out the window, watching as a storm rolled in slowly over the hills. But the storm outside didn't worry him, because the one inside had finally passed. Morris returned with coffee. The president's office sent a statement. They want to meet with you. Medal of Freedom nomination. Thomas chuckled. Took them long enough? Thomas, she said softly, why didn't you just tell them who you were? He thought for a moment, then answered, because if the truth only matters when someone has a title, then we've already lost. I needed them to see me, without the resume. Morris swallowed the lump in her throat, and Thomas closed his eyes, finally resting, not because the fight was over, but because the world had finally opened its ears. They didn't expect him to speak, not after what he'd been through. But when Officer Daniel Kelley stood before the Department of Justice, hands folded, voice low but steady, you could hear the walls shifting. I was trained to obey, he began, eyes fixed forward. But no one trained me for the moment when obedience felt like betrayal. The room fell silent. Kelley continued recounting what most had chosen to ignore, over 20 cases where Officer Maddox falsified evidence, coerced statements, or made arrests without probable cause. The pattern was clear. The motive even clearer. I was part of it, Kelley said, voice shaking. Maybe not by action, but by silence. That ends today. 3 days later, headlines exploded across the state. Cedar Hill, under federal investigation. DOJ launches civil rights review. Officer Troy Maddox indicted on 23 federal counts. 3 wrongful convictions overturned in 72 hours. For years, those cases sat buried under technicalities and paperwork. Now they were breathing again. And for the first time, the town of Cedar Hill was forced to look at itself in the mirror and flinch. In a modest studio in Atlanta, Thomas Avery sat before a live national audience, suit pressed heart steady. He didn't need a teleprompter. The truth was already written. Justice isn't an apology, he said, looking into the camera. It's not someone saying sorry after the damage is done. It's action. It's accountability. It's a system that protects the people who have no power, especially when no one's watching. Millions watched that night, and millions didn't forget. Back in Washington, Director Morris extended a quiet invitation. I'd like you to join the National Police Training Commission, she said. You'd help design protocols, ethics, cultural response, real reform. Thomas raised an eyebrow. You sure they'll let a washed-up veteran teach cops how not to be tyrants? Morris smiled. You didn't yell, you didn't punch, you just stood still, and the world moved around you. That's the kind of training we need. He nodded, not for pride, but for purpose. All right, he said. Let's make sure the next Kelley learns better than the last one did. Weeks later, as the world kept spinning, Cedar Hill quietly transformed. The station, once infamous, now bore a new plaque dedicated to service, not power. Internal reviews became standard. Community panels formed. And one afternoon, as Thomas walked through the newly reopened facility, a voice called out behind him. Mr. Avery. He turned to see a young officer, early 20s, nervous, eager, unsure. I just graduated last month, the young man said. And I joined the force because of your story. Thomas blinked, taken aback. The officer continued. Not because it was dramatic or heroic, but because you didn't scream. You didn't run. You just held the line. Thomas smiled deeply. Then hold it better than I did, he said, and make sure no one ever has to prove they're worthy of dignity. That night, Thomas sat alone on his porch, sipping coffee. The cicadas hummed. The sky stretched wide. His chest still ached sometimes, but the heaviness had shifted. He wasn't fighting anymore. He was building. And somewhere far beyond Cedar Hill, a wall had quietly fallen because one man refused to lose himself in the noise. 1 year later, the town didn't look the same. The old Cedar Hill station had been torn down brick by brick, like the silence it once stood for. In its place stood a sleek, glass-fronted building, sunlight pouring in through wide windows. Across the front in bronze letters, "Protect, Serve, Respect." And walking through those doors on her first day in uniform, Maria Delgado, now the first Latina police chief in Cedar Hill history, held her head high not for pride but for purpose. She wasn't just stepping into a role. She was stepping into a promise. At a town hall that evening, Officer Daniel Kelley took the podium. Not as a rookie, not as a man trying to prove anything, but as the newly appointed chair of the Police Oversight Committee. The same young man who once questioned everything now stood for accountability. He looked out over the crowd, diverse, alert, expectant. "We don't erase the past," he said softly. "We learn from it. And if we're brave enough to face it, we earn the right to build something better." Applause rippled through the room, not loud, but real. Outside town, just past the edge of the square, a modest plaque stood beneath a newly unveiled statue. A figure in uniform. Not saluting, not pointing, just standing still. Steady. Calm. It wasn't about medals or battlefield glory. It was about dignity. At the base of the statue, etched in stone, were the words, "You can forget my rank, but don't forget my dignity." Thomas Avery stood beside it that morning, fingertips tracing the grooves of the inscription. His hair had grayed further, but his posture remained strong. He wasn't there to be admired. He was there to remember. Jason approached from behind, phone in hand, eyes wide with disbelief. "Dad," he said, half laughing, half choking. "The president just quoted you on national television. He said justice is not an apology, it's action. That's yours." Thomas blinked slowly. They remembered that Jason smiled. They couldn't forget. Later that afternoon, Thomas returned to his small office tucked inside the new nonprofit he'd founded, Veterans for Justice. A place where forgotten voices found their footing again. Where those who served but were silenced could come together, share stories, and fight for better. He wasn't leading marches. He wasn't giving speeches. He was building quiet ripples. As the sun began to dip below the cedar trees, he returned to the square once more, alone this time. The statue now cast a soft shadow over the stone pavement. At the far edge, a boy stood watching. Barely 10. Black, skinny, quiet. He didn't speak. He didn't move. But his eyes were locked on the statue, and on the man beside it. Thomas noticed him, gave a small nod, then crouched gently to the boy's eye level. "You thinking about being a soldier?" he asked. The boy shrugged. "Maybe." "Well," Thomas said, "whatever you decide, just don't let anyone tell you who you are before you know it for yourself." The boy nodded. His gaze didn't leave the statue. "Was that you?" he asked finally. Thomas looked up at the bronze figure, then back at the boy. "It was, but only because I didn't let them make me someone else." The boy smiled just a little and turned to walk away, but something stayed with him. A kind of echo. As Thomas rose to his feet, the wind moved gently through the square. Not loud, but steady. Like a voice too firm to be dismissed. They tried to forget him. They tried to reduce him to a file, a fingerprint, a misunderstanding. But in the end, he became the change they never saw coming. Thank you for staying with us till the very end. If this story moved you even just a little, take a moment to reflect on what it really told us. That dignity is not given by a title. It's held in the quiet choices we make when no one's watching. That justice doesn't come from noise, it comes from truth. And most of all, that change begins when one voice refuses to stay silent. If you believe stories like this matter, we invite you to like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to Mr. Mac's Stories for more powerful narratives that shine a light on justice, courage, and the quiet strength that shapes real lives. Your support isn't just a click. It's the fuel that keeps our small team creating stories that challenge, inspire, and stay with you long after the screen fades to black. This is more than storytelling. This is Mr. Mac's Stories, where dignity remembers and silence speaks volumes.